All right. So last night we had a pretty startling, in my opinion, revelation of what's happening with their solar cycles. NASA announced in an article, June 12th, that Dr. Irina Kitashvili, Shively, four times. Sorry, doctor. I do apologize. Anyway, we'll leave this information on our website so you can go check it out. She does leave an email as well. But Bay Area Environmental Research Institute, and also funded by NSF SHINE program, AGS 1622341. Solar activity, space weather, and technology. So this first part of the slide, and this is the person who wrote the article for NASA claiming that solar cycle 25 is going to be the weakest that we've seen in the last 200 years. So why does this person say this? Well, this presentation right here is going to give us the answers to that, or at least explain how they came to this conclusion. Take a look at our sunspot cycles. We all know the Maunder minimum very well. And then, of course, the Dalton minimum, which you see is not quite as a deep minimum as the Maunder minimum. And then now the Maunder minimum, which many people are trying to have it named the Eddy minimum, is approaching us. In fact, we're here. And this paper talks about it. This presentation talks about it. The evolution of global magnetic fields has been observed for 4 solar cycles. Here we have the butterfly diagrams. We've all seen these before. Notice how visually weaker they appear, not just in strength and intensity of image here, but smaller wings. If this is called the butterfly graph, so I'm saying the wings look a lot smaller than the 2000, 1990, and the 1980 era. Data assimilation approach allows us to obtain reliable forecasts by taking into account uncertainties in both data and dynamo model. We use the Ensemble-Kalman filter method. It allows prediction of future state of the sun by relating observations of the surface to the state of the solar dynamo inside. And here we got a bunch of NASA math for all you people out there that love this stuff. I'm not even going to pretend to recite this problem. This method worked well for prediction of the current solar cycle number 24. The prediction below was made in 2008 at the start of solar cycle 24. So here are the predictions that they were looking at for solar cycle 24. The white dots are the monthly sunspot data. I believe the red line is probably the prediction. So looking at what they predicted for solar cycle 24 was pretty accurate. And we all know how weak of a solar cycle 24 was. We've already talked about how it's been the weakest in 150 plus years. Okay. So here's how they came up with their 25 prediction. The method has now been applied to predict the upcoming solar cycle number 25. So we take a look at these 2 cycle spots here that were the northern hemisphere and the south hemisphere. And these numbers are tremendously much lower than what we saw last year at this time. I believe from a respected solar physicist who everyone kind of got behind and said, hey, solar cycle 25 is going to be about equal strength of solar cycle 24 or slightly above at max. What we're seeing here, folks, is beyond more than 50% lower solar activity than what we've seen in solar cycle 24. Plain and simple. So yesterday we talked about NASA confirming the grand solar minimum for the cycle 25. We are now entering the grand solar minimum. When you make a claim that we haven't seen cycles this week in 200 years or so, we all know how grand solar minimums work. They're every 200 years or so, 200 to 206 tops. We're right on schedule, guys. So not only did NASA release that we are in a grand solar minimum without coming out and saying it. I mean, folks that follow this theory, all you have to do is connect the dots, guys. And that's why we're doing this tonight. We're trying to help you guys connect the dots. Now, this scientist is being supported right now by NASA. And I've read several papers on NASA that talks about man-made global warming. I've read several papers on NASA that talks about, not heading into a grand solar minimum. This changes everything. And on top of that, we have Zarkova's work who's getting ready to come out. And we're going to be able to dissect that as well. And it'll be interesting to, now that we know that NASA is confirming one form of the Dynamo model, it'll be interesting now how much more widely accepted her work will be, especially just being peer-reviewed and accepted.
She has the double dynamo.
So she has the double dynamo model. So, and we'll get more into, I'm not even going to attempt to act like I know how to compare right now because there is so much information that we still need to go over.
Using different layers of this.
And, Mari has explained to me in the background, thankfully, that she's using more than one layer of the sun. So very interesting stuff. And I'm anxious to see what kind of data we get in the future from the Parker probe. So I'm very, very excited about what's to come. But right now, still dealing with this. So this is how they decided to go with their prediction for solar cycle 25. They used the same method. They applied the method that they used to predict 24. And look how close they came on getting it right. Not bad. Not a bad prediction, especially for something, I'm telling you guys, this is huge research. This study is huge. This presentation of explaining why and how we're going to have the weakest solar cycle in the last 200 years. This is big news, guys. I got to be honest with you. I can't speak for Mari. I can speak for myself. I've been back and forth about when's grand solar minimum, when's it going to happen, what's going on. But to me, it's more clear than ever that 2020, the beginning of cycle 25, we are entering the grand solar minimum. And 26 and 27 and 28. I remember when I first started research, I was told those solar cycles would be just as worse. In fact, I also was told that 25 was going to be about what they are now predicting. And here it is. And I remember seeing a graph for 26, 27, and, I think Mari would probably agree with me on that. I feel like that this upcoming grand minimum is going to be more of this than the Dalton minimum, just because we're talking about something that happened around the same time. Around the last time we got out of a minimum was 1819, 1820, okay, almost 200 plus years ago. So we are right on cue for the next grand minimum. Maunder, Dalton, modern. It's to me, this does a really good job for people that follow this topic. This is a lot easier, I think, for most of you to understand, because if you've been here for a while, you kind of have a grasp of this. So when we see this kind of information being posted on NASA, that's where I get excited. Now I'm trying to be as layman's term as possible for all you newbies out there as well, because again, I'm no expert, but what this is saying, this is the reason why this study was done, why they came out and said that the solar cycle we're heading into is going to be the weakest in the last 200 years. This presentation is showing us why. It goes on to read that the results show that the next solar cycle will start in 2020, reach its max by 2025. Again, that's pretty puny. Cycle 25 is expected to be even weaker than the current solar cycle. So what we were told last year, where some scientists had a bug up their butt, didn't like that this sunspot theory was actually proving correct. We all know what this is going to do to anthropogenic global warming supporters. This changes everything. This is a complete game changer. Not just the article last night, but the actual fact that we are being shown why by this NASA scientist, why she thinks that this is going to happen next. And here's another simulation of what's to come for solar cycle 25. According to this forecast, upcoming solar activity will be the weakest in the last 200 years. Once again, confirming what they wrote in that article. And here we go. Conclusions. Predictions of solar cycles requires linking dynamo processes inside the sun to observe sunspots. This is very difficult due to our incomplete understanding of the physical mechanisms of the solar dynamo, and also due to observational limitations that result in significant uncertainties in the initial conditions and model parameters. Using the data assimilation technique, we have made a successful prediction of the current solar cycle 24 before it started. That prediction was made by using sunspot number data as a proxy for the solar magnetic field. The new approach takes advantage of synoptic observations of magnetic fields emerging on the surface of the sun to produce a more advanced and reliable forecasting method. For this work, we combine observations from NASA, space missions SOHO and SDO with ground-based data and the National Solar Observatory. Using the current available observational data, predictions and prediction uncertainties have been calculated for solar cycle 25. The results based on both sunspot series and observed magnetic fields indicate that the upcoming solar maximum of solar cycle 25 is expected to be significantly weaker, not average, not slightly above, not a little bit above 24, significantly weaker than that of the current cycle, which near its end. The model results show that a deep extended solar activity minimum is expected in about 2019 and 2021. The maximum will occur in 2024 and 2025, and the sunspot number at the maximum will be about 50, with an error estimate of 15 to 30%. The maximum likely will have a double peak or show extended high activity for over 2 to 2.5 years. I just, to end on this, the fact that they're saying this is going to be significantly weaker, the maximum will be about 50, and that's about, it could be 15 to 30% higher or lower. A lot higher than what we saw in solar cycle 25, well over 100. Well over 100. The normal is solar cycle 23. Actually, it's probably closer to cycles 22 and 21, or closer to, that's what your normal max is, around 180 to 200. But we are well below that, folks. And that warming, those summers, I can't imagine how next summer, how we recover from this upcoming winter here in the Northern Hemisphere. I live in the Northeast, and I tell you, this information is, it's time to kick it in high gear, folks. When it comes to getting your prepping plans done, being ready for this, it's right here in our faces right now. And I want to thank this doctor, this scientist here at NASA, for putting together this small presentation to back up the reason why we are now seeing from NASA that this is going to be a significantly weaker maximum, not just by a little, significantly. That to me, and we can see it right here in the prediction map. It's almost at 50 below, almost below 50. And you see the little error rate here, the little bar. Let me go ahead and point that out just so you know what that looks like. This is what this little thing right here is the top of the error rate, and then down here is the bottom. So they're saying that there is a possibility that the maximum sunspot numbers for the maximum could be below 50. What's next after 25 and 26, 27, obviously. But from the information that I've looked at and everything that I've put together, and I think we're going to have a lot of clarity too when we speak to Dr. Zarkova here in the coming weeks. But a lot of things are pointing right now to this very prolonged period. And they even explain it here, that we are going to be in for a prolonged activity, or lack of activity, I should say, over the next several decades. So, again, I wasn't expected to hear not just the confirmation that the grand solar minimum is upon us, but it's confirmation that this could be a significantly long time of low solar activity that could go on for a longer period of time than was once expected. And again, Dr. Zarkova's work, we are going to get to go over that with a fine-tooth comb. I can't talk tonight. Good Lord. We will be going over it extensively before we talk to Dr. Zarkova.
You're doing good, Jake.
Well, I can use less of the peanut gallery. Thank you.
I'll edit it out for the next time.
You know, I guess I'm a little tongue-tied. This is a lot to absorb. Over the last 2 days, I've had a lot of time to think about this. And I remember in the very beginning of this channel, I had Ice Age Farmer on. We were doing a live hangout together. And I always kept saying, I was the guy that was rooting for the soft landing of this. I was the guy rooting for it. Christian, I remember his comments back when I said, I think this will be a soft landing. And I remember him telling me, I hope you're right. I really hope you're right. He didn't think that this was going to be a soft landing. So there's a lot of people that think that. There's a lot of people that think that this is going to become a lot serious situation than we imagined right before our eyes very quickly. A lot of people have thought that. We thought maybe this was just techniques to be clickbait or fearful. But some stronger concern now into those claims, especially when we see NASA, the one and only NASA, come out with this conclusion and supporting the work that we're seeing here. And also coincidental that Valentina Zarkova's work has been accepted as well in her peer review process. So a lot's happening, guys. And I said to Mari the other day, I said to her, where did you find, how are not more people talking about this? And, because she brings me the articles, so half the time, I don't realize the work she has to do. And she told me this was buried. You had to dig for this information. This was not just something on the front page of NASA. So it's buried. You have to know what you're looking for to find it. And we found it. And we're bringing it to you. And I think it's time, these last 2 videos we've done, last 2 nights, I think it's time to really analyze these last 2 shows, this presentation, this article. Go over it yourself. And then think about everything that we've talked about weather-wise on this channel and what we've showed you on these graphs and previous minimums and sunspot cycles and the weather that happens during these periods of time. It's historical information right here and here. So we can't say, oh, it's going to be just like Maunder or Dalton. But what we do have is an idea of how things were historically and where we're at now and what we're due for. And a lot of folks are saying we're going to be due for a lot of low solar activity for a long period of time. Some folks said it was going to be like a Dalton-like minimum. I'm not so sure about that now. We will see. And we will also dive more into Dr. Zarkova's work as well in the coming weeks, and you guys will not be disappointed as to what is coming with that. All right, so let's switch gears a little bit. So now that we know that our sun is going to go into a slumber, a deep one, green revolution, solar and wind produce just 3% of global energy. So where I'm getting with this is if we're only producing 3% now, what are we going to be producing in 20 years from now? Wind and solar energy generation is growing, but it's still an incredibly small part of the global energy mix. Meanwhile, fossil fuels, coal, natural gas, and oil accounted for 85% of the global energy consumption in 2018. In fact, BP reported that the U.S. led the world in oil and natural gas production growth. U.S. petroleum output saw the biggest annual growth ever recorded in any country, BP had said. In other words, the shale is booming. The U.S. surpassed Saudi Arabia and Russia in 2018 because the world's largest oil-producing nation. It has a link that wants you to go look at Democrats spend climate change hearing, avoiding talking about the Green New Deal. Yeah, because it's embarrassing. Oil remains the most used fuel in energy mix, BP reported in its annual energy review. Coal is the second largest fuel, but lost share in 2018 to account for 27% of its lowest level in 15 years. So BP is coming out with a study that says that CO2 is at its lowest in 27% in 15 years. Output. Man's output at BP was 27%, its lowest level in 15 years. Think about that. And we all know that the parts per million is at 415. It was lower in 2006. It was lower in 2016. Carbon emissions are going up in the atmosphere at 415 parts per million, but yet BP says that we are burning less coal. Anyway, share of natural gas increased to 24%, such the gap between coal and gas has narrowed to 3 percentage points. The contribution of hydro and nuclear remained relatively flat in 2018 at 7% and 4% respectively. Strong growth pushed up renewables to share about 4%. So BP breaks it down for us. 27% in the coal, 24% in the natural gas. And then you have small shares of hydro, 7% and 4%. And then down here at the bottom is renewable shares. Renewable energy generated from wind, geothermal resources, solar, biomass, and waste. China is the world's largest renewable energy producer, but also uses the most fossil fuels. The two biggest sources of renewable energy and wind and solar only produced 3% of global energy in 2018. Wind, solar has basically grown rapidly in recent years, but it's not enough to keep greenhouse emissions from rising because it's not us that's doing it. I have to include that. Limiting global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius above the pre-industrial times would cost as much as $122 trillion by 2050. That's the down payment, folks. That's not the total cost. The United Nations estimated in 2018. Politicians and environmentalists are pushing for the 1.5 degree goal, but energy experts and economists are skeptical. BP estimates carbon dioxide emissions jumped 2% in 2018. That's the fastest growth rate in 7 years. BP's estimate is less than 3.7 increase in emission projected by the Global Carbon Project late in 2018. So emissions rose on higher energy demand. The oil giant mostly attributed to the jump in demand to extreme weather in North America and Asia. Remember the cold last winter, record cold that is. Demand for natural gas grew nearly 2.5 times faster than for renewables, driven by U.S. and environmental policies in China to improve air quality. Coal's share of global energy demand is at its lowest point in 27 years, though its actual use has increased. And that's important to note as well. People know that if they want to stay warm, keep the lights on during some of these brutal winters. Coal is our savior, unfortunately, for all those out there who don't want to burn coal. I get it. You want clean air and clean water. I do too. But I think there's a lot of carbon capture technology out there that's helping us with that as well. And we're starting to show a decrease in numbers. UN chief poses for Time cover. Yeah, this one's funny. This guy here, he's standing on some islands, I guess, for Time magazine. And here, let me show you guys the image real quick. That's cute. I love it. There's the old Time. Well, it won't show us the image, but whatever. You get the point. Time magazine cover shows UN chief Antonio Guterres standing in waters off a Pacific island that is allegedly sinking into the sea, except scientific studies indicate it's not. Studies have found that most low-lying Pacific islands either remain stable or increased in size over the decades, including Tuvalu. One researcher noted that the loss of land is unlikely to be a factor in forest depopulation of this area. So Time magazine is jumping on the smear campaign of the lies of rising sea levels taking out Pacific islands and other areas as well. This alarmist. Now, by the way, scientists have proven that there has actually been growth on this chain of islands. Time magazine also makes a mention that Fiji's islands are going to have to be moved as well. I also saw an article, though, thankfully, someone's reporting the truth. It's funny because mass media, or mainstream media, I should say, wants to convince you that the sea levels are rising, it's eating up Pacific islands, and we're all going to drown, thanks to man-made global warming. But in reality, you go to weather.com, and there's a video about some Hawaiian islands that are actually reappearing. They're growing. So there's so much proof out there that geologists are telling us that these islands are growing, in fact, not disappearing. They're not flooding. They're not going underwater. Just more from that mainstream media who wants you to believe that you're causing all of these problems with the climate. And that's just simply not true. Shutting down middle America and blue collar workers. We talked about this a little bit last time when I was mentioning Dayton, Ohio not recovering from their economic loss with the GM truck and bus plant. And, you know, another person left a comment about how they have acquaintances from Dayton that drive to Cincinnati and Columbus for work. Folks, that's an hour 15 to an hour 30-minute drive for most people from Dayton. So that's how bad the economic situation is. So imagine losing these auto industries due to your lawmakers, your people that you elect into office. They're shutting down certain things for policy and tax purposes and just money to put in their pockets. But here's a great article here on What's Up With That explains what happens to people when policies as obnoxious as the Green New Deal are put in place. This is an interesting number here. Nearly 350,000 German families have had their electricity cut off because they can't afford to pay their power bills. German families and business had to cope with 172,000 localized blackouts in 2017. The country has banned fracking, hydraulic fracking, and imports U.S. coal and Russian natural gas. Unfortunately, more than 3,000 elderly people die every year because they cannot heat their homes, and this is in Britain, exposing them to constant chilly temperatures that make them more likely to contract and succumb to respiratory or heart disease. The situation is likely to get even worse. In stark contrast, abundant natural gas supplies from the fracking revolution have driven prices down in the U.S., saving some 11,000 American lives each winter, according to the recent National Bureau of Economic Research. Multiple widespread blackouts over the past 3 months in South Australia were caused by elimination of coal-fired power, 52% reliance on wind turbines, storm grid instability, and inability to predict weather conditions or peak power demand. Again, more articles are coming out every day, guys, that are telling us right in our face, this isn't live. These are, and what I like about What's Up With That is that they leave links to get to these numbers, where they got these numbers from, what articles, where they pulled this from. Guys, this isn't some blog spot here that's just giving a biased opinion. These guys aren't funded by big oil or anything like that. Actually, wasn't Anthony Watts recently received by the Heartland Institute, if I'm not mistaken? Anyway, point I'm trying to make right now is more and more we're seeing negative effects from solar and wind, and we read about how bad other countries have it by relying on solar and wind, how expensive their electricity bills and heat bills are now, and how 350,000 German families, I mean, they got some serious cold this year, guys. Serious cold. Serious hail this summer so far. Guys, don't go anywhere. We'll be right back with our weather section.
Do you like this show? Give us a thumbs up. Want to support us more? Share to your favorite social media platform. Buy a t-shirt or become a Patreon. All links are in the description below.